The plains lay stretched and silent beneath a pale afternoon sun, the kind of quiet that pressed against a man's ears and made him listen too hard. Caleb Boone shifted in his saddle, eyes scanning the tall grass as his horse moved carefully forward. He had been tracking the deer since early morning, clear prints, snapped twigs, the faint metallic scent of blood in the air. Meat meant survival out here, especially with winter creeping closer. He steadied his rifle, breathing slow, patient, the way his father had taught him years ago. Something moved. Caleb tightened his grip, sighting through the brush. The shape was wrong, too tall, too unsteady. He lowered the rifle, just as the figure stumbled into the open and collapsed to the ground. Dust rose, then settled. What lay there was no animal. It was a woman. Caleb swung down from his horse, heart hammering. She wore worn buckskin, torn and darkened with blood near her shoulder. Her black hair was braided tightly, though loose strands clung to her sweat-soaked face. An Apache woman, very young, very still. He crouched a few feet away, every instinct screaming danger. This land had taught him caution. Sometimes mercy cost more than bullets. He almost stood, almost turned back to his horse, when her fingers twitched and her eyes fluttered open. They were sharp eyes, afraid, yes, but not weak. She tried to push herself up and failed, a soft, broken breath escaping her lips. Caleb reacted before thinking, moving closer and holding up his hands to show he meant no harm. He knelt, tearing a strip from his shirt with his teeth and pressing it gently against her wound. She hissed in pain but didn't cry out, instead locking her gaze on his face as if memorizing it. "I won't shoot," Caleb murmured, unsure if she understood. "I swear it." Her breathing slowed just slightly. The blood soaked through the cloth anyway. Whoever had shot her hadn't meant to miss. Caleb glanced back toward the empty horizon. No riders, no smoke, just endless land and a choice he couldn't undo. He had come out here for meat, for something simple and necessary. Instead, fate had dropped something far heavier at his feet. He sighed, long and quiet, and slid an arm beneath her shoulders. The hunt was over, and the consequences were just beginning. Lifting her onto the horse was harder than Caleb expected. She was light, almost frighteningly so. But the moment he slid an arm around her waist, her body tensed with pain. She clenched her jaw, a low sound catching in her throat, and he paused, murmuring reassurances, even though he doubted she trusted his words. Slowly, carefully, he eased her up, settling her in front of the saddle where he could keep one arm around her to steady her. Her blood stained the leather almost immediately. The ride back to the cabin felt endless. Every jolt of the horse drew a sharp breath from her, and Caleb shortened the reins, guiding them at a slower pace despite the urgency gnawing at his chest. The plains no longer felt empty. Shadows stretched too long. Wind through the grass sounded like whispers. He kept turning in the saddle, scanning the horizon, half expecting riders to appear at any moment. Whoever had shot her might still be nearby, and the thought sat heavy in his gut. When the cabin finally came into view, she stirred, lifting her head weakly. Her eyes darted from the rough wooden walls to the surrounding trees, her body stiffening as if she might bolt despite her injury. Caleb helped her down, keeping his movements slow, deliberate. Inside, the air smelled of smoke and dried herbs. He set her gently on his narrow bed and stepped back at once, giving her space. She watched him closely as he gathered water, clean cloth, and what little medicine he owned. When he turned back, she flinched and he froze, holding the basin out in front of him like a peace offering. After a tense moment, she relaxed just enough for him to approach. Cleaning the wound was brutal. The bullet had torn through flesh, leaving jagged edges and swelling. She bit down on a strip of leather he offered, her hands gripping the blanket as her body shook. Still, she made no sound. The silence was heavier than any scream. By the time he finished binding her shoulder, night had fallen. Caleb lit a lantern and sat on the floor near the door, his rifle resting across his knees. He could feel her eyes on him from the bed, measuring, wondering. He didn't look back. Sleep came in fragments. Every creak of the cabin made him tense, every gust of wind sound like footsteps. He had taken her off the plains, but the danger hadn't stayed behind. It had followed him home, breathing quietly in the dark, waiting for morning. Morning light crept through the cracks in the cabin walls, pale and thin, and Caleb was already awake when he felt movement behind him. He turned slowly to find her sitting upright on the bed, her back rigid, one hand pressed carefully against the bandage at her shoulder. Pain lined her face, but her eyes were clear and alert, studying him the way a hawk studied the ground below. She spoke first, her voice soft but steady. "My name is Nalin." Caleb straightened, surprised more by the sound of her English than the words themselves. "Caleb Boone," he replied after a moment. He set his rifle aside and stood, keeping a respectful distance. He poured fresh water into a tin cup and offered it to her. She accepted it with a nod, sipping slowly. They spoke in fragments at first, words chosen carefully, like stepping stones across a river. She told him she had been traveling with her people, moving camp before the weather changed. Soldiers came through without warning. There was shouting, confusion, horses panicking. She ran when the shots began. One found her before she reached the trees. She didn't know who fired it. She didn't know who lived. The weight of her words settled thick in the room. Caleb had heard stories in town, most told with anger or fear, never with the quiet certainty she carried. He felt something tighten in his chest, a mix of guilt and helplessness he didn't know what to do with. "You should go somewhere safer," he said finally. "I can take you to a healer, or to your people if you know where they are." Nalin shook her head slowly. "Not yet. They will be watching the trails." Caleb frowned. "Who will?" She met his gaze. "The men who hunt what they do not understand." The truth of it settled over him like a cold wind. Helping her hadn't closed a chapter, it had opened one. His cabin, his quiet life, had become part of something larger and far more dangerous. Nalin shifted, trying to stand, and gasped as pain shot through her shoulder. Without thinking, Caleb stepped forward, steadying her. She stiffened for a heartbeat, then allowed it, her hand resting briefly against his arm. Her eyes searched his face. "You could have left me." Caleb nodded. "I know. Why didn't you?" He didn't have an answer that felt simple enough to speak. Instead, he said the only truth he knew. 5P didn't feel right. She studied him for a long moment, then gave a small, solemn nod. Trust, fragile and hard-earned, began to take shape between them. The sound of hooves reached Caleb before he saw the riders, a dull, rhythmic thud that didn't belong to the wind or the land. He stepped out of the cabin slowly, the sun just beginning to sink toward the horizon, painting the plains in copper and gold. 4 men crested the low ridge to the west, their silhouettes sharp against the sky. They rode loose and confident, rifles slung carelessly, the kind of men who believed the world would move out of their way. Behind him, he felt rather than heard Nalin approach. She stood just inside the doorway, her face pale but composed, one hand resting against the wall for support. Her eyes narrowed as she took in the riders. "They are not soldiers," she said quietly. Caleb nodded. He already knew. Soldiers rode in lines. These men rode like wolves. The leader reined in a short distance away, his gaze flicking from Caleb to the cabin and back again. "Afternoon," he called, voice light, almost friendly. "We're looking for someone. Wounded. Apache." Caleb stepped forward, boots crunching in the dirt. His rifle stayed in his hands, not raised but ready. "No one like that's passed through here." The man smiled, thin and cold. "Funny. Tracks say otherwise." The other riders shifted, hands drifting closer to their weapons. The air tightened, every second stretched thin. Caleb felt the weight of the choice he'd made days ago pressing down on him now. He could step aside. He could say nothing. It would be easier. It would be safer. Instead, he planted his feet. "She's under my roof," he said evenly. "That means you turn around." A laugh broke from one of the men, but it died quickly when Caleb didn't move. The leader studied him more carefully now, taking in the set of his shoulders, the steadiness in his eyes. He glanced past Caleb, just enough to see Nalin standing tall despite her injury. Silence followed, broken only by the wind moving through the grass. Finally, the leader spat into the dirt. "Not worth it," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. With a sharp jerk of the reins, he turned his horse. The others followed, casting hard looks over their shoulders as they rode away. Caleb didn't lower his rifle until the riders vanished into the distance. When he turned back, Nalin was watching him. Something changed in her expression, less guarded, more certain. "You chose a side," she said. Caleb exhaled slowly. "Guess I did." The land stretched wide and unforgiving around them, but for the first time, neither of them stood alone in it.